Now, our goal in creating a website or a responsive website is that our website should display properly on different screen sizes. So when we are on a larger screen, we want our layout to expand or to grow to fill up the space. And when we are on a smaller screen, we want our layout to shrink to fit into the screen. Now, the flexible box layout model, popularly called the FLEXBOX, helps you to achieve this. Now, the FLEXBOX is a one-dimensional layout model that allows responsive elements within a container to be automatically arranged depending on screen size. Now, compared to float, the FLEXBOX is a more efficient way to lay out, align, and distribute space among items within a container. Now, these are the 4 characteristics of the FLEXBOX, and down here I have listed some of the advantages of the FLEXBOX. Now, in order to use this FLEXBOX, there are basic terms that you must know, and the first one is the flex container. So basically, we wrap our flex items within the flex container. In other words, the flex container is the parent to the flex items. Now, when you look closely, you would see I have flex item, I have a space, and I have flex item 1. I have flex item, I have a space, and I have flex item 2. So this is basically the FLEXBOX syntax. Now, next up, I want to talk about the main axis and the cross axis. Now, depending on your flex direction, your main axis is the plane on which the boxes are resting on. Here you would notice that the main axis is the horizontal plane. Now, when I go to my code and change my flex direction, you would notice that my main axis would change. So I'll put a flex direction and I'll set it to column. And when I save and reload, you would notice that my main axis has changed. Now, next up, because our goal here is to design a layout that fits into different screen, we are going to need certain properties to achieve this. So next up, I'll talk about the properties applied to the flex item, and the first one is the flex basis. Now, basically, the flex basis is the main width of the element before we apply any flex grow or flex shrink. So when I go to my box here and put a flex basis, let's say a flex basis of 100 pixels, you would notice that when I reload, the width of my boxes would change. It is also important to note that the flex basis would always override the width. So when I reload, you would notice that this 100 pixel of the flex basis would override this width. Now I'm going to save and reload in my browser. Now, next up is flex grow. Now, using a flex factor, we distribute this leftover space to these boxes. So what we are doing with the flex grow is when we are on a larger screen, we expect the layout to increase or to grow proportionally depending on the flex factor to fill up available space. So when I go back to my code and put a flex grow, let's say I put a flex grow here and give it a factor of 3, and I come down and put a flex grow here and give it a factor of, let's say, 0, and I come to the last box and put a flex grow there and give it a value of 1. Now when I save and reload, you would notice that the spaces would be distributed based on this flex factor. You can see this one got the highest and followed by this, and this didn't get any because it was set to 0. Now next up is the flex shrink. Now for the same reason with the flex grow, but in the opposite direction. Now when we are on a smaller screen, we want our layout to shrink proportionally to fit into the screen. Now the last one here is the flex. The flex is more or less the shorthand of the flex item properties. So we have flex grow, flex shrink, and the basis. So instead of writing all this, I could use the flex property, just writing flex here, and my first value would be the flex grow, and the next one will be the flex shrink, and the last one will be the flex basis. So that's basically the flex property. Now next up, I want to talk about some of the properties applied to the container. Now the first one here is display. Now this is basically the FLEXBOX itself. Now when you go to my code, now at the top you would see my display property, and here you could see under the flex container you would see my display property set to flex. Now it could be flex or inline flex. Now next up is the flex direction. Now we use the flex direction to change the main axis of the flex item. Now we have 4 basic values here. We have the row, the column, the row inverse, and the column inverse. So when I put a flex direction here and set it to column, when I reload and go back to my browser, you would see that the boxes have been is now this, and I could also change it to row, and let's say row inverse, and it means it should arrange my boxes in reversal. So when I set it to row inverse, when I go back, you would notice that the boxes have been arranged backwards. You can see it's now 3, 2, 1. Now the next one is the justify content. Now the justify content and the align items, they do basically the same thing. The difference is we use the justify item to position elements along the main axis, while we use the align items to position elements along the cross axis. So let's say I put justify content here, and I set it to flex start, and I put align items, and I put it to flex end. Now you would notice that when I go back to my browser, you would see that the main axis is being controlled by the justify content. You can see it has moved to this side, which is the flex start, and on the cross axis it has moved to the end. Now if you want to get this box or these boxes to the center, you put both the justify content and the justify items to center. Let's say I center the 2 of them. You would notice that the boxes would be at the perfect center. So basically we use the justify content to move the elements in the main axis, and we use the align items to move them in the cross axis. Now we have different properties you can use: flex start, flex end, center, space around, space between, or space evenly. Now the last one is the align self. Now whenever you want to apply a particular style to a particular box, let's say space around here, now when I save and reload, you would notice there will be space around all the boxes. So like I was saying, when you want to apply a particular property to a particular box, you can use the align self. Let's say I put align self here, and I set it to flex end. You would notice that the second box will move down. So we use it to apply a particular property to a particular box.